It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Bonnie Stewart. Dr. Stewart is an associate professor of online pedagogy and workplace learning at the University of Windsor and an international thought leader in the realm of digital education and pedagogy. She has researched, worked, and taught in the field of educational technologies and higher education for more than 2 decades and is renowned for her groundbreaking work in adult learning approaches to digital practice. Dr. Stewart was an early pioneer in MOOC research, which I'm betting is come up in this presentation somehow. I'm betting, I'm betting. And an ethnographer of Twitter as an academic space. Since 2020, she's received numerous research grants focused on digital pedagogy, including 2 SSHRC grants that examine digital classroom tools and their associated data risks for both educators and students. She was also a collaborator on a 3rd SSHRC grant that examines strategies for teaching culturally and linguistically diverse international students in open and online learning environments. More recently, and the subject of what we're going to be looking at today, Dr. Stewart has published on and spoken about the capabilities and limitations of generative AI tools like ChatGPT in what is a very quickly evolving landscape. Dr. Stewart's critical approach is grounded in her extensive background in digital and experiential education, and she emphasizes the need for critical literacy in understanding AI. In her recent work, she's already published on AI. In her recent work, she insightfully highlights the dual nature of Gen AI, its potential to enhance learning, and also the significant ethical, data privacy, and equity concerns that it raises. Her work encourages all of us to be both users and critical evaluators of AI, ensuring that technology serves as a tool for enhancing rather than undermining educational integrity. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bonnie Stewart.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It is an absolute privilege to be here, especially and to hear about the long tradition of this conference and the big shoes that I'm standing in. So I appreciate you coming on this journey with me today. Can everybody hear me? Okay, and the online people, I hope they're okay. Great, I think I'm gonna stand over here and I tend to wander a little bit. I want to take us on a shared conversation about this wild moment that we find ourselves in after the last wild moment. Is anybody feeling a little like I've had enough wild moments actually? Yeah, myself as well. But I kind of want to confront some of what this disruption of generative AI might mean for us, not just in our classrooms, but as a sector, as a concept of higher education. So to start, thank you, Curtis, for the absolutely lovely introduction. You clearly read pretty deep into some of my online bios, and I appreciate that. I work at the University of Windsor. I spent about 13 years prior to that at the University of Prince Edward Island as a staff and sessional member doing digital support for faculty. And above all, I'm kind of an open educator. How many of you are familiar with the term open as applies to education? So I used to do a lot of my work in public, online, in spaces where I was collaborating and networking with folks around the world. I'm not doing quite as much of that anymore because of some of the reasons we're going to talk about today. But I want to find out a little bit about the room I'm in before. So I'm going to invite you, if you wish, zero pressure, but particularly for the folks who can't be in this room with us today, I wanted us to be able to have a conversation and sort of see where folks are at. So this is Mentimeter. It is not collecting your personal data. This is my Mentimeter account, so it's collecting mine. It knows where I am. The join code, if you go to menti.com and put in the code 53592619, it should take you to an ongoing series of questions, which will be interspersed throughout the presentation. Are folks able to get in? Yes. Okay. I am going to encourage you just to let me know, what do you do here? Because I love the fact that this institution has a culture of this giant teaching and learning conversation every year. Okay, all kinds of different roles. I'm just here. Manager, situation, simulation coordinator, holistic support, associate dean, faculty member. These are a great many hats. And I love the richness of this because I believe that, and part of this is from my own background in open education, that when you bring together people who do different things in an institution, you get a far greater chance of having a productive conversation that changes things for folks in that room. So I'm going to give this about 10 more seconds if you want to contribute. It's not a skill testing question. It's okay if you don't contribute. There will not be a test. But I love this. All right. What a privilege to be here with all of these folks. I'm going to move us to the next slide. It has another question. I think Gen AI is A, a dystopian nightmare, B, a potentially useful tool, C, our amazing future, or D, all of the above. So we're getting quite a few all of the aboves. Fair. This just kind of lets me have a sense of who I'm speaking to. I think if I came in and it was all C's, I would start to be a little nervous and feel like possibly this wasn't the right room for my particular message, but wish I had my running shoes on. All right, I'm going to move this forward again in about 5 seconds, but I appreciate you just kind of throwing in your ideas. And I have one more, which is a little more true confession time. What have you done with Gen AI so far? And Gen AI includes tools like ChatGPT. It includes teaching tools like Diffit. It includes the new GPT 4.0. It includes, frankly, Microsoft Copilot and just the embedded Meta AI that has replaced search on Facebook. If anybody has gone looking for someone you went to high school with recently and discovered that there is now no way to find them without using AI. All right. Email drafts, created Facebook stickers, debug code, reframe my thoughts, brainstorming, tested it, nothing, fair. See quite a few nothings. Would you be able to scroll up so that, is it, maybe I need to do that. Oh, thank you. Automated the boring stuff, fair. Created a conference description. Curtis, is that you? Created a marketing blurb, used it to respond to difficult student emails. Here's the thing. There is always, I think, going to be a huge range of answers to how people use this because there's a huge range of answers to anything that we use as a tool to support our educational practice, right? None of these are wrong answers. This stuff absolutely has some real uses. If you have something that has a formulaic kind of right answer element and you don't have a ton of time, absolutely there are some really useful paths here that we are going to talk about. But for the most part, what we're going to do is unpack what's being sold to us when we are encouraged to use AI. You will notice in my little bio description there at the front, there was no AI expert. I don't build this stuff. I do have 20 years as sort of someone who thinks with and about digital tools. And we're going to go on some of that journey. There'll be a little provocation. I will talk about our participatory past with digital tools, our somewhat problematic present, possible futures, and then look at if we can get to a place where generative AI could take us to a generative ethics, a sense of what we're doing educationally where this makes sense. But a lot of the folks, when I go to my LinkedIn feed right now, it's fascinating to me because I talk about AI, I publish about AI, I'm working with it. But so many people are suddenly AI gurus. And let's be clear, 98% of us who are talking and writing and publishing about this didn't do much with AI even 2 years ago. So there is an element in this whole conversation that is really the core of what we're going to talk about, which is that we are being sold something right now. And my provocation is a story that many of you are probably familiar with. Has anyone heard the story of the Emperor's New Clothes? Probably most of the room. Basic story has, I think, 4 key characters. There's an emperor or a king. He's a little vain, he's a little proud, he wants to be the man, doesn't want to, let anybody else have too much power. There are also some tailors who are selling something. They're swindlers, actually, or carnival barkers. And what they are selling is, sir, you are such a man of wealth and taste that if we make you this beautiful suit, no one will be able to see it because they're not smart enough. They're not erudite enough. They're being left behind. But you, sir, you are going to be able to see this suit and it is going to look great on you. So the emperor says, sure. And he gets his suit, which is nothing, made. And out he wanders into the other characters who are the townspeople who are all lined up for this grand parade. None of them can see the suit. They see an old man in underpants, but they don't want to let on that they only see an old man in underpants because the buzz is, oh my goodness, have you seen this disrupting, amazing suit? Look at this. And so everyone is like, yay? Uh-huh. And there's one final character who is a child who happens to be standing in the parade and eventually goes, he's naked. In my version, he is wearing underpants. This is the safe for work version of the Emperor's New Clothes. But this child is the only character who is not anxious about what other people will think of them and not kind of consumed with fear of missing out on the next big optimizable thing. And so is able to say, wait a second, whoa. I would like to take us on a little journey using the Emperor's New Clothes as a lens today. But, Bonnie, have you seen GPT-4o? How many of you know what I'm talking about? Great, you are on it. May 13th, literally this week, the next wave of revolution came along in the AI world. And so the OpenAI, the company that built ChatGPT and released it in November of 2022 and began this particular tsunami of disruption that we are on, basically has taken their text capacity, their voice capacity, their visual real-time capacity, and synthesized them so that now you can have GPT-4o up on your phone. You can show it what you're doing, right? And it can engage in real time with text, with voice, with people around you. They also released a whole bunch of cute little Vimeo demo videos. How many of you have watched any of these? They're kind of fascinating because, for instance, do you see the man on the far left with his dog? He has GPT talking to his dog. Now, I am not sure why he can't talk to his own dog. I'm not sure about the use case of many of these choices, and I'm going to want to talk about that with you. But basically, there is somebody going, oh my goodness, you're such a good little, I think she says squizzball, which was interesting. Not a term I'm familiar with, but it's AI. Sometimes it's not perfect. Others are singing happy birthday. 2 are harmonizing together in real time. It is cool. It is neat. It is showy. It can do stuff. At the same time, I am not 100% sure that we should take something that can talk to a dog and sing as the core of what we're going to build education for a generation that's already been through a pandemic on top of. And what I want to ask us before we go forward is to think about that story of the emperor's new clothes. And who are we? Right? Most of us are not the king or the emperor. Many of us are not necessarily the tailors with something to sell. But often we are in the role of those folks at the parade, looking around, don't want to seem like I'm not cool or on top of things, better clap. And that's what I would like to send us forward with. We're told to think about what we can do with these tools, and there are things we can do, but I do want them to think about I want us to think about what they are doing with us, with our traditions and institutions of education, flawed though they are, in need of change though they are, and think about the directions that this is aiming to take us in. So I'm now going to cast us back. Late 90s, early 2000s. Everybody remember Catterday? I did enjoy the early internet. How many of you remember the term Web 2.0? Right? Web 2.0 was basically the idea of the read-write web, that rather than just have official information cast out towards you by the Encyclopedia Britannica and other gate-kept official sources, we too, us mere people clapping on the side of the road, can contribute to the body of knowledge that is the internet, right? And our students can do that. And we can actually put stuff out there and maybe connect with teachers in other places, and those students elsewhere might read our students' work or whatever. And we were contributing to this broad sort of user-generated content version of the web that was fundamentally participatory. The dominant ethic of this era of digital education, and I would say it probably really kind of blew up around 2004 and had a good solid decade and a half of dominance, was connections, networks, and people. So in that world, you get the overwhelm of, oh my goodness, there's so many people on Twitter or on this hashtag or whatever. But in that kind of rolling feed, you find a few voices that you trust, you build some sense of who they are, and you are able to filter some kind of relational belonging within this wide network as you're contributing stuff out there. Fabulous, wonderful. Participatory learning was the big core of this. I used to bring my teacher candidate students, my BEd students, onto Twitter to do hashtag chats with folks in Egypt and Ireland. We used to do, we still do some infographic work or blogging or things that we share with the world out there. The idea, and this comes from Henry Jenkins, and this is like 2008 era, participatory culture shifts the focus of literacy from one of individual expression to one of involvement, right? So it's very much being a part of something. But what do you do when the thing that you're a part of starts to become toxic and weaponized and run by disinformation? And that's the thing. How many of you have some experience with participatory teaching and learning? Some aspect of it. I'm going to encourage you, if you want to these are all parts of what participatory can be, where learner work is openly visible to classmates, or where learner work is open to the public, or where learners' ideas are intended to be part of other learners' learning experiences. Those are all signs that you've been engaged in a participatory type learning experience, whether as a learner or an educator. And so we're seeing a lot on the red one on the bottom, a little less on the pink one, and with good reason. Sometimes learner work there are lots of reasons to both have public audiences and not have public audiences, depending. Visible to classmates. I'm just going to give this another like 10 seconds or so. It's always interesting to see if it moves. Cool. Okay, I'm going to slide us forward. The core idea of Web 2.0 or a participatory work is the idea that the community is, in a sense, the curriculum. That contribution to a commons of knowledge is something that is a goal of learning. Curtis said, here we are. Funny story. How many of you do remember what MOOCs are? Massive open online courses, big deal, 2012, year of the MOOC. Sebastian Thrun, who was the Stanford AI professor, the very first MOOC was actually a course on AI in 2011, offered at Stanford, open to the public. Now I say very first MOOC. The very first actual MOOC was at the University of Manitoba in 2008, but it had 2,000 people instead of 150,000 people. So it was a small niche experiment that happened in Canada. The funny story part is the word MOOC was coined in my own house by my partner, interviewing on an early podcast called EdTech Talk, the folks who were teaching that course at the University of Manitoba. We both got excited and interested in this and started running these things. But by early 2011, we were the only people who had a SSHRC grant on MOOCs, but there were also only about 8,000 people in the entire world who had ever heard of the name. In 2011, when the Stanford AI course was opened up, it was actually just the fact that someone at the New York Times had happened to do an article on this little grassroots Canadian thing that was about opening courses for free so that people who weren't paying could still contribute to the course, could still have their blog posts responding to the prompts distributed as part of the content of the course. It was this open choral kind of thing that we were doing here in Canada. And the person at the New York Times looked at the Stanford AI course, which was pedagogically very different, right? It was content modules put out, but there was no coming back. There was no contributory. There was no participatory element to it, really. But the New York Times person said, oh, these are both MOOCs. And the name stuck, which was, in my household, a bizarre time, because suddenly this tiny niche thing that my partner had created or had named that we worked on and we had publications on, well, those publications have a great number of citations all of a sudden, right? And we had done a little video for our SSHRC project called What is a MOOC? It now has 1 million views on YouTube. It would never have had that kind of life cycle, except that what happened was hype. The Gartner hype cycle, have any of you ever heard of the Gartner hype cycle before? A fairly well-known phenomenon in educational technologies or innovation more broadly. There's a thing that happens and suddenly everybody starts talking about it. And in Emperor's New Clothes format, everybody's going, oh, yeah, that sounds amazing. It's going to be a tsunami of change. It's going to be an earthquake of educational disruption. It's going to be, everybody is making claims until we get up to the peak of inflated expectations. And suddenly, often, there's a discovery that maybe most of these things are actually a little bit of the traveling salvation show, where you're kind of hoping to sell people something that there isn't actually a business model for yet. your new ed tech robes will disrupt everything. I've played this game before. It turns out that Sebastian Thrun's claim in 2012 that in 50 years there would only be 10 universities left thus far is not aging well. Who knows? We still have some time. His own MOOC company has since folded. And while MOOCs have become a way of large elite institutions sending out their offerings for free for small credentials, it has not actually drastically changed probably the way that most of us in this room live and work. Some of us in 2012 were standing there waving our arms going, ah. Here we are. But since 2012, what has happened is also of interest to me. Sal Khan, how many of you have heard of Khan Academy? Pretty much everybody, was one of those early people who was absolutely riding the MOOC train in search of a business model. He is now one of the featured videos on Vimeo by OpenAI for all the amazing things that it can do to tutor his son in math. Some people engage with education in ways that are persistent over time. Enclosure. Now, I met a historian last evening, although I think he said Canadian history. So I am not a historian of, I think, 12th, 13th century English history, but there was a time when the peasants of England had land that was called the commons that they could grow food on. Fabulous. And then the crown decided that that was actually their land and they couldn't grow food anymore there. And they enclosed it and they instituted a bunch of laws that said, nope, you can't grow food here anymore. The first person that I heard use the term enclosure for what was beginning to happen about a decade ago with digital platforms in education was Audrey Waters, who wrote critically and beautifully on this whole field for a great deal of time. And what she was saying was that platforms and platformization are enclosing this participatory digital commons of people contributing ideas, and they own it. We don't own it. As someone who unwisely did their own PhD on Twitter, she's not wrong. In addition to enclosure happening in the last 10 years of the infrastructures and the four walls of our classrooms, we also have extraction becoming a major thing. How many of you have touched some form of keyboard since we started, right? How many of you are on the Wi-Fi? Now you work here. Fair. How many of you know who sees what you put into that keyboard? A couple of you probably do. How many of you don't? Yeah, most of us don't. Terms of service are not meant to be read by human beings, right? They're legalese. So for the most part, we live and teach and circulate in a world where we are constantly creating data that we don't know what happens to it, right? It is extracted from our day-to-day regular actions and it goes, I don't know, somewhere. Those two things together, the enclosure and the extraction, change the power structure of what it means to be in a learning space. Because this is not just happening to you, it is happening to your students. And so each time that you take them into a platform, they are both being enclosed by the terms and the affordances that have been set by that vendor, and also their data is being extracted from them, even if our institutions have tried to set, and demand policies that are reasonably protective of student data. Enclosure and extraction amplify structural harms. This is the work of Sophia Noble who is based out of California, and she has been looking for the last 6 or 7 years on the inequitable and differential ways that racialized people have machines and machine learning roll over on them. Students who may be marginalized through class, through gender, are much more likely to be misrepresented in systems that are enclosing and extracting from them. I love this image. Alas, poor Twitter. The community and the curriculum end up becoming precarious to the platform itself. And we have all seen over the last few years how dramatic that can be since Elon Musk bought, renamed, and has effectively, from an educational perspective, killed a great deal of the really vibrant educator community that was there, although lots of folks are still there and trying to do good work. This is the ethic of enclosure. Yesterday, you had doors. Today, they're glass. Oh, whatever could be wrong. Basically, the participatory is getting shoved to the side because it is not nearly as profitable for companies as enclosure and extraction. So that was the era of Web 2.0. Recently, we've been promised Web 3.0. It is not participatory. Some of its key pieces include things like NFTs, semantic web, metaverse, blockchain, AI, interoperability, a lot of things that are often black boxed, so that rather than being able to contribute, we're kind of like, I don't know what that is, but I don't want to say that I know what that is. So yeah, yay, Emperor, nice shirt. Maybe we shouldn't buy the 3.0 hype. How many, do we have any NFT investors who want to? I'm sorry. We feel your pain. NFTs before AI were the last big Gartner hype cycle, and now they are basically worthless. Oops. Into that environment that has been enclosed and created a generation that is accustomed to being extracted from, enter ChatGPT or Gen AI generally. I asked my free Gen AI to make me a picture of me giving a presentation. You'll notice they called it Hag GPT. I think I'm being trolled by by the device. But I enjoy this cartoon. For folks who may not be able to see it, basically, this woman is sitting there talking to someone, and she says, what's going to be the impact of ChatGPT on our business? Insert institution, doesn't matter. We don't know how much of what it says is made up, or if it'll take away our jobs. We don't know the security risks, or if it could damage our reputation. And she says, well, what do we know for sure? Only that we want to adopt it everywhere as fast as we can. And you know, if you had told me 2 years ago that this was going to roll out like this, even with having lived through a few hype cycles before, I would have been like, oh no, we're not really just going to leap to everywhere as fast as we can. But yes, we are. Yes, we are. So our reality, I think, is that we are in the middle. Our institutions are stuck in the middle of a business gold rush, right? And like a gold rush, everybody is hustling to get in and get a piece of this AI pie. They are not educators. They have no clue really what it is, but there's going to be pie and they're going to have some. And a lot of these folks are not interested not only in the details and pedagogical aspects of education, but actually in preserving the concepts of an institution. This is from Forbes. This fella who wrote the article has a company that is poised, already offering micro credentials, looking to move more into the offering of credential spaces, and sees AI as a great opportunity for companies and corporations and vendors to be offering education as opposed to institutions. So I do think that there is a level of existential threat that as institutions, we need to be considering. It is not coming from the AI itself, but from that search for a business model. What's our move? Are we going to be the clapping people on the side? No. Let's look a little bit about possible futures for higher ed. Now that the four walls, did any of you have this Fisher-Price school? I loved this toy when I was I'm dating myself here, I realize, but this was like, it had a little chalkboard on the inside. It was the best. But the four walls of the classroom are now platforms that are extractive and soon could have AI built into them, whether we want them to or not. Here's a reality. Hard truths. Students will use it. They may not use it for the things we think they're going to use it for, but they will use it. Often, this conversation gets framed as an academic integrity problem. You have great people at this institution doing really interesting work with academic integrity in this moment, and therefore, I got to talk a little to Allison last night at dinner. I feel good about the guidance that you have in terms of not just, here, we're going to draconianly penalize everybody who wants to use this thing that we're also like, shouldn't I be using it? I don't think that whether students are cheating is our big concern. I think what happens to higher education, and if we continue to have a value proposition to use the language of business models in this time, is really important. But that doesn't mean that we can just go out and buy tools that are going to tell us what students are using AI so that we retain the power that we're comfortable with, right? How many of you have heard that you can get a good AI detector that will help you tell if your students have used it? Yeah. Right now, you can't. If you are teaching, again, very right and wrong answer types of things, maybe. But if you are teaching concepts that are complex, right, and your students are synthesizing ideas in the work that they're doing for you, the AI detectors really can't pull that out effectively right now. The numbers are not good. And that just gives power to the platforms. We're knowledge workers. All of us who work in education are knowledge workers. The real threat is that Gen AI auto-tunes knowledge. Okay? How many of you are familiar with what auto-tune does in music? It makes me sound okay when I sing. Thank you. It's great. But it does take out the high ends, the sharp ends, the bottom ends, and creates this kind of pleasant middle, right? How many of you have seen the kinds of paragraphs that even early ChatGPT churned out? I've gotten a number of them as PhD research proposals this year. You can tell, you can see it. It's getting better. I'm sure soon I won't be able to see it. But nonetheless, it does swish everything into this pleasant middle. And that auto-tune has a huge risk for what it means to know, right? If you have to be someone who knows, give back that sort of middle ground, already ChatGPT and AI are trawling from what's out there on the web. What's out there on the web has been largely created by the global north. A lot of the voices are white, right? There are a whole bunch of things baked in, of knowledges baked in that leave out the knowledge of some people. That auto-tune is only going to take that further. It also flattens our biases. So this is a recent Gen AI photo, lovely, dreamy. She's riding a bike on the beach. That sounds actually much less pleasant in reality. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this picture? Beyond the bicycling part. Friends, again, this is the safe for work version, but this woman has been generated riding a bicycle on a beach with no pants. Why? Because Gen AI trawls the internet. And what does the internet think of women? Not a lot. Ultimately, when we auto-tune knowledge to these pleasant outputs, we are also baking in all kinds of biases about whose knowledge counts, whose embodiment counts, and who gets placed in these invisible, internalized stratifications. And so if we just turn everything over to these tools, I don't want my kids learning that this is fine. They're already on the internet. They're not that little. But if this becomes the source of education, eventually the critical voice just gets quieted. The other thing that happens here, this is my fancy diagram. Thank you. Thank you. Gen AI flattens the leverage that we have as educators to generate learning. That piece is even scarier to me. Most of us have been educated in a system where, in order to get students to a certain learning outcome, an idea that we want to seed, we try to create, hopefully engaging, ways of pushing them into a situation where they have to push something out, right? We create a seesaw where we put pressure on with these assignments, and those assignments tip over into the outputs that the students create. And the outputs often, especially in a great classroom, aren't even necessarily the whole point. The point is really that triangle, that fulcrum at the middle, where the student has to, in order to create the output, go through some kind of learning process, right? How many of you have ever, in your own personal lives, had to do something, but on the journey somewhere, you actually started to have like ideas that fired, and you're like, oh, I kind of get something now, right? That's how we have constructed and thought of learning. If you just throw the output out, hey, students, I want you to, it doesn't matter what it is, right? Write a 5-paragraph essay on Hamlet. Well, if you're not actually reading Hamlet and you're not actually writing about it, but you give me a fabulous essay, do you know who doesn't win? Everybody. So we are challenged in this moment because our fundamental concept of what it means to create a learning process for students is being kicked out from under us. We can no longer confuse learning with outputs. And I'm going to say that one more time. We can no longer confuse learning with outputs. We've spent 20 years in higher ed building learning outcomes around everything we do so that there are outputs that are fair and designed intentionally to try to create the experience that we're trying to create. And we're a little bit hooped in this moment, because if we get stuck on the outputs piece, we can no longer guarantee the learning. Few more problems. Our knowledge commons is being polluted by junk. Increasingly, as Gen AI takes over search, the things that we search for are not necessarily accurate in the things that are generated. That has always been possible and true, but there are increases because what is being trawled from is increasingly Gen AI outputs that nobody has had an actual chance to clock eyes on and be, no. The carnival barkers, the tailors, the swindlers are primed to enclose and replace our entire sector if we let them. I don't want to let them. I think that there is something valuable in the institutional process of offering public education to anyone who wants it and having people go through a learning journey to get somewhere. But sometimes I'm a little overwhelmed and I don't really want to do it anymore. But I want to ask, this is where our provocation leads us, and I'm just checking on my time. Okay. What would a generative ethics for this era look like, right? Each of the eras before us, Web 2.0 had its dominant ethic of the participatory. The extraction era, the enclosure era has a dominant ethic of your privacy policy is now a bathroom with glass doors. I think that we still have a moment where we as educators can say, hey, what do we value? And how can we create an ethic for going forward with some of these tools, but understanding that we can't just buy the hype. Ethics are community morals, right? Your personal morals are your own lights, your sense of what's good and bad. Ethics are those that are adopted by a given community, not necessarily always voted on or agreed on, but that everybody within that culture kind of understands. Who knows the moral of the story? In the story as I told it, who should we aim to be? Probably the child, right? And I think there's something for a lot of educators that's poignant there, that maybe remember, this is actually about, education is about educating next generations. But to do so, we are going to have to fight the urge to be like, yes, I'm doing all the things. Doesn't mean we're not going to do some of them, but we're going to try to do them from a position that isn't just clapping like seals for something that we don't understand. It might mean asking why these new 4.0 Vimeo demos are all female voices that sound super high affect and super pleasing. And one of the videos is even about, look, you can interrupt her. And I worry about a world where people are conditioned to have someone speak to them with great, oh, Les, I'm right here. What can I do? And talk right over them. And whose lives is that going to make worse as people internalize that that's how we talk? And educational ethics needs to build on educational values. I don't want to tell you what yours are. You as a learning community, as an institution, have all day to have those conversations. But I am going to quickly share a few things that I'm doing with my own educational ethics in relation to AI and my practices as a way of trying to resist and disrupt some of this disruption hype. One, I'm trying to guide my students rather than punish them, fundamentally. So my syllabus is focused on what not to do to get caught using AI. Now, my last syllabi, I teach full year courses, so my last syllabi were created in September. I'm gonna have a lot of work to do to update for this coming year, but it is not about control and compliance. It is about, if you're going to use these things, here's how you can still engage in the learning process to make sure that what you're submitting is not something that I need to police. I'm also seeking pedagogical rather than technological solutions for my classes. I teach tech, but if I treat the tech as the thing rather than the pedagogy, that gives the control back to the vendors. And I don't want to do that. How many of you are familiar with the Algorithmic Justice League? There are many, many people doing great critical work. This is the Algorithmic Justice League. This is Dr. Joy Boumwini, who is based out of the US and does a great deal of work on both the intersections of race and gender and technology, and is pushing back particularly hard with Timnit Gebru. They both used to work at Google and had some fairly negative experiences with AI ethics and are actively advocating for a non sort of tech rolls over us future. I also am trying increasingly to look at AI and Gen AI as search in terms of how my students might engage with it, and not just as sort of output generators. My students are going to AI to ask questions in the way that I might go to Wikipedia. And so I'm starting to talk about, okay, here's how to prompt. Because the thing is, the risks of AI and the risks of getting false information differ depending on the questions that you're asking. So this is a table that my partner and I built. But basically, what we're thinking about is the types of information that you're looking for. If you're looking for generally accepted facts that you just don't happen to know, then the risk is pretty low because it's largely known stuff. If you're looking for stuff that you imagine that is reasonably accepted, then you're going to start to get into more challenging areas. If you are looking for stuff that's probably contested, right? Then you're going to have to find multiple answers and multiple sources. And all of this has always been true, but with AI, it is significantly more important that they engage in these processes. And so we're just trying to work our way through these verification and prompting practices so that they aren't necessarily landing on completely ridiculous things and absorbing them as truth. We are going to need new search practices like this as a culture. We are going to need the critical literacies that are involved in this. You don't need the knowledge, but you do need to know what kind of question you're asking, and that's hard. And these are the places where educational institutions can have real value if we are encouraging these processes with our students, right? Because corporate education is not incentivized to do so. The best strategy, almost done, has actually been for us at UWindsor to have, we've been running now for almost exactly a year, a community of practice of open drop-ins where people can show up for Zoom meetings, Teams meetings in our case, and have a collective conversation about what have you heard about this? What are you doing with it? What are your concerns? All of those things. It has been the most productive opportunity for me to meet people in different departments, especially because I joined the university about a year before the pandemic, and then I literally didn't go to campus for 2 years. So there's a few people that I know vaguely as small boxes on a screen, but I was in a situation where I hadn't met a great many of my colleagues, and this has been fabulous to do so. It's drop-in. You ain't got to go every week. You ain't got to go every month. We've moved back from weekly to monthly, but it has been rich. And these are just some of my colleagues. I actually did a project with students this fall to make a little video about 12 minutes long, giving a teacher to teacher, because my students are pre-service teachers, a teacher to teacher overview of Gen AI and what it can do, circa wintertime, but also to have some faculty colleagues from different departments share their thoughts and concerns about how they're using it. And so these are just some of their thoughts. My colleague Abdul from social work talked about that global north-south element of voice in AI. And I wanted to really emphasize that for my own students to think about. He says, you know, there's no intelligence in there. It's just plagiarizing other people's work that's already out there. So the number one issue that it raises for him is bias and racism. My colleague Karen from Visual Arts, she's thinking about it. She teaches photography, right? And I don't know if there are folks in this room who teach, but she said from the beginning, it's been a really unstable medium as far as being a truth teller. So she's using it as kind of an opportunity to unpack some of that history of the medium with her students and teach how manipulation and trickery has been part of the story. Again, to see that kind of critical awareness and literacy among students. My colleague Padma from nursing, she's already lived through, she's a practicing nurse as well as a teaching colleague. She's already lived through the Dr. Google era of medicine, where everybody knows because they read something on the internet. And she's worried that what Gen AI does is it takes that to the next level, where when you lose that important triangle of learning, that even our medical professionals may be at risk of having that flattened. Here are the outputs piece. So she's trying to figure out how to navigate that. Ultimately, I think a generative ethics has to come from the belief that we can be uncomfortable. All of these things are fairly uncomfortable, right? It's hard to reconsider what we know and the outputs that we are comfortable with and think, how am I going to work outside of those boxes? And I don't think any of us individually are going to get there 100% on our own. But if we can accept that we're going to be uncomfortable, and if we can work together, I think that we still have the chance to build a really interesting educational conversation in this moment. If we don't give the power to the tools, right? If we keep our own power and insist that no, education is not something that's being sold to us by vendors, but rather something that we do, and maybe we will pick and choose how we want to use these things. I end with Ursula Le Guin, my favorite. We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by a human being. And I think that particularly the Emperor's New Clothes can be resisted and changed by human beings. So I have one last interactive slide for you. It is tongue in cheek. What are you going to do, TMU? There's a correct answer to this one.
All right, I think we have time for one question. Does anyone have a question? We have about 10 minutes before the next session. Yeah? Do it.
Thanks for this. My name is Angela. I teach in the journalism department. And my question was, I really love the idea of focusing on learning as opposed to testing, but with attendance rate at an all-time low and participation marks not looked for, like nobody wants to do that either. How do you measure the learning if they're not showing up and you're not testing them?
I don't think that we are actually able to measure the learning in the way that we imagine that we can. I think that we need to, I recognize that attendance, buy-in is increasingly a problem. The pandemic shifted that, but also we have kind of now convinced a generation that education is just for work, right? And so we've lost that lever that we had, that many of us were educated under, that there is something more to this that is of value. We can't, from the classroom, change that conversation entirely. I think that we need to recognize the situation that our students are in and approach it with care. They believe that they're there to get a credential. Our job, as best as we can, is to try to engage them in the idea that there's a lot that we're unlearning here as well as learning, and I'd like you to do this, but I can't I don't really have the power anymore to force my students to do it. Because if I focus things entirely on outputs, then I'm just encouraging them to give me the outputs and pretend that everything is going well. I have moved a lot of my own stuff to kind of much more in-class discussion and even creation of some things to the extent that I can to make valuable the time that we have in class. But if you're not there, right, I still have to get some things that people submit. I recognize that to an extent, there are students that are moving through and that I am not necessarily going to be catching them. I am refusing that policing role. I am going to continue to try to engage them in learning. And our institutions are going to have to make decisions about how we sell that learning to students more broadly. But I'm really glad you asked that question. We don't have a magic answer right now. We are in a difficult space. My only hope is that if we start really talking about this, what do? We can't confuse learning with outputs anymore. Do we care about learning? Do we just want to do credentials? We need to be in these conversations, and we need to be, frankly, I think, much more visibly in control of the conversations. So even getting journalism students to write about how educators need to be in control of these conversations would be a nice and refreshing change from the constant narrative of hype of this business is going to change higher ed. We can't magically fix all of this, but I do think that we can refuse to cede certain types of ground. And from our individual classrooms, it's going to mean some things that we think are a little bit ugly and a little bit not how we'd like them to be.
It's a great question and a great answer. Thank you so much, Bonnie.
My pleasure.
Bonnie's provided a really invaluable, I think, context for us, a context maybe we didn't fully have before. So we will talk more later in the day if you're interested about the community we're building around Gen AI in the spirit of that. This is for you. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.